Today, I'd like to provide you a brief overview of the concept of populism. Populism isn't quite what you think it is. It has nothing to do with becoming homecoming queen or king. Populism is the farmer's party. No, not that kind of party. It's not a hoedown out in the barn, square dance. It's the farmer's party of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Farmers in the Great Plains and Midwest had numerous issues, and they banded together to create a political party, much like the Republicans and Democrats. Simply, who were the populists? Old MacDonald? No. Bob Evans? No. They were farmers that, like I said, lived in the Great Plains states, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, places like that during the second half of the 19th century. As we discussed earlier, there were three main reasons for westward expansion. One, the US government wanted to tap into natural resources, wanted to exert its influence over territory in what traditionally was barren land. Very few US citizens lived in the Great Plains during this time. So, to encourage citizens to migrate out to the Great Plains, they enacted the Homestead Act during the Civil War that granted 160 acres to anyone that was willing to give it a go out in Great Plains territories or states. Um, as long as they would stay there for 5 years, they would be able to claim that land for free if they made it that long. In order to help supply these people, railroads expanded from coast to coast, going through the Great Plains states. And this allowed faster and more fruitful train of supplies and goods to cross through the Great Plains states. Farmers had numerous problems settling the land in that area. Some of the problems that the farmers faced were large amounts of debt. Farming is not cheap, especially to get started. A lot of times you need to take out loans to buy equipment, seed, things of that nature. And when banks charged high interest rates, it made it difficult to pay those off. The proposed solution that farmers wanted was more government involvement. They wanted banks to be regulated and forced to charge what farmers considered to be fair interest rates. Another issue farmers had was not receiving fair prices for their agricultural production. Farming is a difficult venture. You're not always guaranteed that your crop will be successful. You're the ultimate gambler if you're a farmer. You never know. One 5-minute hailstorm, a drought, various bugs, an infestation of bugs eating your crops. Numerous things could go wrong. And so farmers wanted to make sure that they had fair prices during their good years of production. So the farmers wanted increased regulation, government regulation of businesses, Wall Street commodity trading services that trade in agricultural produce. And they wanted to make sure the government was looking out for the little guy, especially the farmer. Another problem, uh, you can have the greatest crop of wheat, corn, soybeans, whatever product you're selling. Problem is you have to get it to market. And the railroads would often charge what farmers would consider to be high rates to carry their products to the bigger cities like Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago. And so the farmers wanted the government to control the railroads to charge fair freight rates. Other problems the farmers had was increased foreign competition as more and more countries were industrializing. Um, especially in Europe and parts of Asia, they too uh, were able to increase their farming production, and people weren't looking to the U.S. as much to obtain agricultural produce. So, what farmers wanted was the government to put tariffs on foreign agricultural produce and therefore encourage more Americans to buy American made produce instead of foreign competition. Some things just happen, natural disasters. They wanted to make sure that the government would provide a safety net to help farmers, kind of like insurance, government insurance, to protect them when bad weather hit. Another problem farmers had was that there was a decline in crop prices. This is mostly due to the farmers were becoming too good at their job. They were making too much food, and well, just like the simple laws of supply and demand, when you have too much supply and demand is lacking, the price point will eventually come down. And farmers were concerned they weren't making enough money. Um, the big way to fix that is, farmers need to better allocate their resources and either not produce as much or produce different, agricultural produce, so they could get better prices at market. So farmers, they had a very difficult relationship with tariffs. On one hand, they wanted them. On another hand, it hurt them. A tariff is simply a tax on a foreign good sold in the United States. So, an example of a tariff would be if a product came from Italy or Germany or Japan, and it could be made for whatever reason cheaper, and it was just the same quality as an American made product. Let's take the chair you're sitting in, for example. Um, That chair could be made in Italy for, let's hypothetically say, $15 and shipped to the US. All the entire cost for that chair is $15. Well, an American made chair might cost $20. And naturally, when you have a product that is of similar or the exact same quality, if it's cheaper, you're probably going to go with the cheaper product. And so, people that produce chairs would be upset. Same thing for farmers. If a Canadian farmer can produce wheat at a cheaper rate than what an American farmer can, people are going to buy probably the Canadian wheat. So, what farmers wanted, and this goes true with business as well, they wanted the US government to put a tax on a foreign product. Therefore, that foreign product would now cost more than the American made product, and US consumers would therefore buy the US product. So, if you put a tariff on Canadian wheat or Italian olives, uh, or Japanese rice, you're more likely to buy American made agricultural produce as it would be cheaper then. So it protects US farmers. However, other countries aren't just going to sit there idly by. When you put a tariff on Canadian wheat, the Canadian government will probably put a tariff on an American made product. Let's say Florida oranges. And so Florida orange growers are now going to be upset because now Canadians aren't as likely to buy Florida oranges. So tariffs, they go back and forth. It's not like your country can put a tariff on foreign goods and other countries will just sit there and do nothing about it. And so this does hurt farmers because other countries would put tariffs on American produce and farmers couldn't sell their goods overseas. So overall, tariffs probably hurt farmers more than they helped. Many tariffs that the government put on weren't necessarily on foreign agricultural products. They were on big industrial products that were being made during the late 1800s in the big cities along the East Coast. And farmers kind of felt left out. They felt that they weren't getting a fair shake from the government. So overall, farmers saw tariffs in a more negative light than in a positive light. So how did this idea of populism end? You've probably never heard of a populist president. You could name Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. You've never heard of a populist president. Well, that's because they never won an election. Farmers did not make up a substantial enough portion of the voting population, and therefore the Farmers Party never really took hold, never really gained a lot of national attention. It was strong in local politics, state and local politics, in places like Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma and Texas and Iowa, Minnesota, but never really gained a whole lot of influence in the West Coast, or sorry, on the West Coast, in the urban industrial Northeast, or really even in the agricultural South. It didn't have as strong as ties as it did in the Midwest. Um, and eventually, the farmers' problems improved to the point where the Populist Party just faded away. Crop prices began to increase, um, and farmers didn't have those concerns anymore. So that's why the Populist Party, we don't have it around today, and you just don't hear it as much. The real big takeaway from populism is that this idea that if farmers banded together and raised their voice and started to influence certain levels of government, that changes could happen. There were some good things that did happen to farmers and came out of this populism movement. And people in urban areas of the country are going to take note. And in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they begin their own crusade to try to fix the problems in the cities, which we'll talk about when we discuss the progressive era here in a couple weeks. So that's the real legacy, is that populism's ideas and influence is going to spread to the big cities where there are going to be plenty of problems we'll talk about soon. And the farmers kind of solve their problems on their own, just through natural, conditions. So the big thing are the two things that I have underlined there. And don't forget, hey, farmers are important because they're the only ones that make food. Have a good day.